To be honest, the most painful truths in relationships don't arrive loudly. They arrive quietly. They show up as a feeling you can't explain, a shift you can't quite prove, and a question you're almost afraid to ask yourself. And if you've clicked on this video, there's a chance that question is already living in the back of your mind. Stay with me until the end, because one of the most important insights men rarely hear will be revealed there. And if you find this kind of calm, honest psychology helpful, take a second to like the video and subscribe, not for the algorithm, but so you don't have to face these questions alone in the future. Now let's talk gently, clearly, and without drama. When a woman is cheating, it rarely starts with betrayal. It usually starts with emotional distance, and that distance doesn't scream. It whispers. The first major sign most men overlook is a sudden change in emotional availability. Not anger, not constant fights, but a quiet pulling away. Conversations that once felt warm now feel polite. Eye contact becomes shorter. Laughter feels forced or delayed. She's still present, but not with you. Psychologically, this happens because emotional energy is limited. When someone begins investing emotionally elsewhere, whether consciously or not, something has to give. And what fades first is often the small, intimate moments. Curiosity about your day, follow-up questions, spontaneous affection, shared humor. She may still care about you as a person, but she's no longer emotionally anchored in the relationship the way she once was. The second sign is a shift in how she handles conflict. This surprises many men. Instead of arguing more, she may argue less. Disagreements that once mattered suddenly don't. You bring up concerns and she responds with indifference or vague agreement. That's not peace, that's disengagement. When someone is emotionally invested, conflict feels worth addressing. When they're not, it feels like wasted energy. Third, pay attention to how private her inner world becomes. Everyone deserves privacy, that's healthy. But secrecy feels different. Her phone is always face down. Messages are answered in another room. Passwords change without explanation. And if you ask simple questions, you're met with defensiveness instead of reassurance. Not because you're wrong for asking, but because guilt creates tension, and tension often disguises itself as irritation. Another early sign is a sudden change in self-focus. She may start prioritizing her appearance, routines, or independence in ways that feel disconnected from the relationship. Growth is healthy, self-care is healthy, but when these changes come with emotional distance, reduced intimacy, and less inclusion of you in her world, they deserve attention. Not accusation, but awareness. Here's the most important thing I want you to understand in this first part. Noticing these signs does not mean you confront, control, or panic. Mature awareness is quiet. Strong men don't react impulsively, they observe clearly. This video is not about blaming women or feeding fear. It's about helping you trust your perception without becoming consumed by it. Because later, I'm going to explain something most men are never taught. Why ignoring your intuition damages you more than the truth ever could, and how emotionally intelligent men respond without losing their dignity, self-respect, or peace. One of the most misunderstood signs a woman may be cheating is not what she does, but how she explains what she does. This brings us to a deeper psychological shift that many men sense but struggle to articulate. Her stories become inconsistent but emotionally flat. Not dramatic lies, not obvious contradictions, just explanations that technically make sense yet feel strangely hollow. You ask how her day was, and she gives you a summary instead of a story. You ask who she was with, and the answer is vague but confident. There's no warmth in the details, no emotional texture. This isn't because she's hiding facts. It's because emotional detachment changes how memories are shared. When someone feels internally divided, their communication loses depth. Words are chosen carefully, but connection is missing. Another key sign is a sudden increase in comparison, often subtle. She may start referencing other men, not romantically, but admiringly. A coworker's confidence, a friend's ambition, someone else's emotional awareness. On the surface, it sounds harmless, but psychologically, comparison often appears when dissatisfaction is already present. It's the mind justifying a shift that hasn't yet been acknowledged out loud. This comparison doesn't mean you are failing. It means her internal focus has moved outward, and that shift is important to notice, not with jealousy, but with clarity. The next sign is changes in emotional accountability. When trust is intact, people are willing to repair emotional ruptures. They apologize, they reflect, they meet you halfway. But when someone is emotionally invested elsewhere, accountability feels threatening. Suddenly, every concern you raise becomes too much, overthinking, or unnecessary. Not because your feelings are invalid, but because emotional honesty would expose the distance she's trying to manage. And this is where many men start doubting themselves. They ask, am I being insecure? Am I imagining this? And that self-doubt is dangerous. Not because it proves she's cheating, but because it trains you to ignore your own emotional intelligence. Another powerful indicator is a change in how she talks about the future. Not a breakup announcement, not dramatic avoidance, just a subtle shift. Plans become shorter term, language becomes less inclusive, we quietly becomes I. Future conversations feel abstract instead of intentional. This psychological distancing allows someone to emotionally exit without confronting the consequences. Now, let me be very clear. None of these signs alone confirm infidelity. Psychology doesn't work that way. Human behavior is contextual. Stress, personal growth, and life transitions can all create similar patterns. But when multiple signs appear together, especially alongside emotional withdrawal, something meaningful is happening beneath the surface. And here's the mature truth most men aren't taught. Your job is not to investigate her like a detective. It's to observe her like a grounded adult. Obsession weakens you. Awareness strengthens you. There is a quiet psychological shift that happens before most betrayals, and it's one of the hardest for men to notice because it doesn't look like wrongdoing. It looks like emotional redirection. This is when her emotional responses, empathy, excitement, curiosity are no longer centered around you. They haven't disappeared, they've just moved. You may notice that when you share something meaningful, her reactions feel delayed or muted. She listens, but she doesn't lean in. Yet later, you might see her energized by conversations outside the relationship. More expressive, more animated, this contrast is not accidental. Emotional energy flows toward where emotional reward is felt. And when that reward is no longer coming from the relationship, detachment follows naturally. Another sign that often appears at this stage is a change in reassurance patterns. When trust is intact, reassurance is offered freely, not excessively, but willingly. When trust is fractured internally, reassurance feels risky. She may respond to your need for clarity with irritation, jokes, or deflection. Not because she doesn't hear you, but because reassurance would require emotional alignment she no longer feels. This is also when boundaries become confusing. She may suddenly emphasize independence in ways that feel reactive rather than healthy. I need space, or I want to focus on myself, can be genuine, but when they appear alongside emotional coldness and secrecy, they often signal internal conflict. The mind seeks freedom when it feels divided. One of the most overlooked indicators is a shift in empathy towards you. If you're stressed, tired, or emotionally low, her response may feel distant or performative. She cares, but not deeply, and that difference matters. Emotional betrayal often begins not with attraction, but with reduced empathy. When someone emotionally disconnects, your inner world stops feeling important to them. At this point, many men try harder. They become more accommodating, more patient, more forgiving. And while effort is admirable, overcompensation can quietly erode self-respect. Relationships are not saved by shrinking yourself. They are clarified by standing firmly in your emotional truth. Let me pause here and say something important. Understanding these signs is not about proving guilt. It's about recognizing misalignment. Cheating is not just an act. It's a symptom of emotional dislocation. And you cannot fix dislocation by ignoring it. Another sign that often appears is increased emotional defensiveness. Simple questions feel like accusations to her. Calm conversations escalate quickly. This defensiveness isn't always about you. It's about the internal tension she's managing. When people feel conflicted, neutrality feels threatening. Here's the psychological insight most men miss. When emotional connection weakens, intuition sharpens. That uneasy feeling you can't explain isn't paranoia, it's perception. The danger is not in noticing it. The danger is in silencing it to keep the peace. One of the clearest signs something has shifted is not in her behavior, but in how you feel around her. Men often overlook this because they're taught to distrust emotion and rely only on facts. But psychologically, your emotional response is data. If you feel consistently anxious, uncertain, or like you're walking on eggshells, something in the emotional environment has changed. When a woman is emotionally aligned with you, the relationship feels stabilizing. Even during conflict, when that alignment weakens, the relationship starts to feel destabilizing. You may notice that moments which once felt safe now feel tense. Silence feels heavier. Affection feels conditional. This isn't imagination, it's emotional incongruence. Another major sign is a shift in responsibility for emotional closeness. You may feel like you're doing all the initiating. Conversations, check-ins, plans, repair after conflict. She responds, but she doesn't initiate. Over time, this imbalance creates emotional exhaustion. When someone is emotionally invested elsewhere, they unconsciously reduce effort where they feel less connected. This is also where emotional rewriting begins. She may subtly reinterpret past events in a more negative light. Moments that were once neutral or loving are now framed as always a problem or never enough. This isn't necessarily manipulation, it's psychological justification. When people feel guilty or divided, they often reshape the past to make the present feel more acceptable. Another sign to pay attention to is changes in physical affection that feel emotionally disconnected, not less affection necessarily, but different, shorter hugs, less eye contact, touch that feels routine rather than grounding. Physical closeness without emotional presence creates confusion because the body is there, but the connection isn't. At this stage, many men ask, should I confront her? And here's the truth. Confrontation without clarity often leads to denial, defensiveness, or temporary reassurance that doesn't resolve the deeper issue. Emotionally intelligent men don't rush to accuse. They first ground themselves. Grounding means observing patterns over time, not moments. It means asking yourself, is this relationship nourishing me emotionally or draining me? That question matters more than proof. Another important sign is a change in how she responds to your growth. If you improve yourself emotionally, physically, mentally, and she becomes distant instead of supportive, it often signals internal conflict. Growth in a partner can trigger guilt when someone feels they're no longer fully invested. Let me be clear again. None of this means you become controlling, suspicious, or cold. It means you become present, calm, self-respecting. You stop chasing clarity from someone who isn't emotionally available to give it. Because here's the part most men never hear. You don't lose power when you notice emotional distance. You lose power when you ignore it. There comes a point where emotional distance stops being confusing and starts becoming revealing. Not because you finally catch something obvious, but because patterns become consistent, and consistency is where psychological truth lives. One of the strongest signs at this stage is selective honesty. She tells you things, but only the parts that feel safe. You're informed, but not included. You know where she's been, but not how she felt. You hear about events, but not experiences. This creates a strange emotional loneliness inside the relationship. You're physically present in her life, yet emotionally peripheral. Another powerful indicator is a change in emotional responsiveness after time apart. When someone is emotionally invested, time apart often increases warmth. They miss you. They reconnect. But when emotional investment has shifted elsewhere, reunions feel neutral. She returns, but she doesn't return to you. There's no emotional settling back into the relationship. This is also where your intuition becomes louder, not frantic, clear. You may notice that your body reacts before your mind does, tightness in your chest, a drop in energy after interactions. These aren't weaknesses, they're signals. Emotional intelligence includes listening to your nervous system, not overriding it. Another sign is reduced emotional repair. If there's tension or misunderstanding, she may avoid resolution altogether. Issues are left hanging. Conversations are postponed indefinitely. This avoidance protects emotional distance. Repair requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels risky when someone is divided inside. At this point, many men attempted to either cling or withdraw completely, but emotional maturity lives in the middle. It's the ability to stay grounded without begging and present without pursuing. Here's an important psychological truth. You cannot compete with secrecy. You cannot argue your way back into emotional alignment. And you cannot restore intimacy by sacrificing your self-respect. One of the final signs in this stage is emotional contradiction. She may say she cares, but her behavior doesn't support it. She may reassure you verbally, but avoids emotional closeness. This disconnect is deeply unsettling because it creates cognitive dissonance. You're told one thing, but you feel another. And when men ignore that dissonance, they often lose themselves trying to fix what isn't theirs to fix. This is where strength looks very different from what most men were taught. Strength is not control, it's clarity. Strength is not confrontation fueled by fear. It's emotional steadiness rooted in self-trust. In the next and final part, I'll share the most important insight of all, the sign that matters more than any other, and how emotionally grounded men respond in a way that preserves their dignity, regardless of the outcome. There is one sign that outweighs almost everything else, and it has nothing to do with phones, schedules, or other people. It's this: you no longer feel emotionally chosen. Not occasionally, not during a rough week, but consistently. And that feeling changes a man from the inside if he ignores it. When a woman is emotionally aligned with you, you feel considered even when life is busy, even when stress is high. There is a sense that you matter in her inner world. When that disappears, you may still be present in her life, but you no longer feel prioritized in her heart. That absence is quiet, but it's profound. This is where many men wait for a dramatic confirmation, a confession, a mistake, something concrete enough to justify how they feel. But emotionally intelligent men don't wait for collapse to validate perception. They understand that relationships don't end with explosions, they end with erosion. Another sign at this stage is your emotional needs begin to feel like inconveniences. When you express discomfort or confusion, her response feels dismissive or impatient, not cruel, just tired. As if your need for clarity disrupts a reality she's already halfway stepped out of. This is not because you are demanding, it's because emotional presence has already shifted. Here's the part that's hard to hear, but necessary when someone is cheating or emotionally exiting. You cannot restore connection by explaining yourself better. You cannot become more lovable by becoming smaller, and you cannot secure commitment by sacrificing your emotional boundaries. So what does a grounded response look like? It looks like calm observation without interrogation. It looks like honest self-reflection without self-blame. It looks like asking yourself whether this relationship still reflects your values, your emotional standards, and your sense of self-respect. Emotionally mature men don't ask, how do I stop her from cheating? They ask, is this the kind of connection I want to give my life to? That question changes everything. Because when you stop chasing reassurance and start standing in clarity, the dynamic shifts. Either emotional honesty returns or the truth becomes undeniable. And both outcomes protect you. This is also where men rediscover something powerful: self-trust, not suspicion, not paranoia, but trust in their own emotional perception. When you trust yourself, you don't need to control outcomes, you can face them. In the final part, I'll share how men who handle this moment with dignity rarely regret it, regardless of whether the relationship continues or ends, and why your response here shapes not just this relationship, but everyone that follows. There is a moment in every man's life when emotional clarity becomes more important than emotional comfort. This is that moment, not because something dramatic has happened, but because you finally see clearly, and clarity, while uncomfortable, is always kinder than confusion. The final and most important sign is not something she does. It's something you stop doing. You stop feeling grounded in the relationship. You stop feeling emotionally safe enough to be fully yourself. You begin editing your thoughts, minimizing your needs, and doubting your instincts just to keep things calm. When that happens, the relationship is no longer a place of connection. It's a place of self-abandonment. And here's the truth: most men were never taught. A relationship that requires you to silence your emotional intelligence is already costing you too much. If a woman is cheating emotionally or physically, the deepest injury is not the act itself. It's the erosion of mutual presence. It's the moment when one partner leaves emotionally while the other stays, hoping, and hope without clarity slowly drains a man of his strength. This is why emotionally grounded men respond differently. They don't beg, they don't accuse, they don't spiral, they pause, they reflect, and they choose themselves, not in anger, but in honesty. Choosing yourself doesn't mean walking away immediately. It means recentering your identity. It means asking, am I respected here? Am I emotionally met? Am I growing or shrinking? Those questions are not threats, they are boundaries. And when a man holds his boundaries calmly, one of two things happens. Either the relationship recalibrates through truth, or it reveals what it can no longer be. Both outcomes are forms of peace. Let me say this gently. Women don't lose respect for men who notice emotional distance. They lose respect for men who ignore it and abandon themselves in the process. Awareness is not weakness. Self-respect is not hostility. Emotional clarity is not control. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. You don't need proof to protect your dignity. You don't need permission to honor your emotional reality. And you don't need to fear the truth when you trust yourself, because the strongest men are not the ones who avoid loss at all costs. They are the ones who refuse to lose themselves. If this perspective helped you think more clearly, consider liking the video and subscribing. Not for numbers, but for conversations that help you grow without shame, fear, or manipulation.